The Pacifica National Board and the WPFW Local Station Board will be voting on a proposed Pacifica bylaws amendment between July 10th and August 24th of 2024. Information on the amendment, about how vacancies are filled on local station boards, and about the process will be posted on the pacifica.org website.
Welcome to the collision.
The Collision, where sports and politics smash. Thursdays at 10 a.m. and on iTunes and Google Play. WPFW, Washington, D.C.
Welcome to On the Margin with Ethelbert Miller. My guest today is A. Van Jordan. A. Van Jordan is a professor of creative writing at Stanford University. He's written several poetry collections. His latest book is When I Wake, I Cry to Dream Again, published by W.W. Norton and Company. How are you doing today, Van?
I'm good. I'm happy to be here with you.
Well, you know, Van, when I think of Akron, Ohio, I think of LeBron James, Steph Curry, and A. Van Jordan. James and
I don't know if Steph Curry thinks of Akron, Ohio. He thinks of...
No, he's born in the same hotel, he's the same hospital, right?
I know.
And you probably were born in that hospital too, right?
Probably was, yeah.
Well, you know,
Yeah.
they have rings, Van.
Mhm.
When you look at your career, what book or award has been the most meaningful to you?
Wow. Well, I have to say, the second book, Magnolia, uh, probably was the most meaningful, just because I feel like wherever I go, people always remark on how that book was important to them. I feel like it also put Akron on the map a bit. We're talking about Magnolia Cox. Um,
Explain who she is, just for our listeners.
so Magnolia Cox was the first African American to get to the final round of the National Spelling Bee in 1936, and she was the kind of heir apparent. Like, people thought that she was going to be the winner because from Akron at that time they had three national spelling bee champs in the span of 8 years. And she's coming from this place that was expected, and she was a phenom. Like, she was like LeBron as a speller, genius, 100,000 words. So she gets to the final round, and then they cheat her out of the win by pulling a word that wasn't on the list, and the word, believe it or not, was nemesis, and that kind of threw her off her game. And it's a much longer story, but I was very happy when I wrote that book, the response to the book. And it was a persona poem. So, the whole book is pretty much in persona. And at the time I had been reading a lot of the poem AI.
Cruelty, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Cruelty, greed, all that stuff. And so um, just studying her work and just really going in on the persona poem. And now we're at the 20th anniversary of that book, and it's just, I mean, I'm talking to you right now from the campus of University of Pittsburgh, Greensburg, where I'm on faculty here with Kaveh Khanum. And a lot of I've had several of the fellows come up to me and tell me how important Magnolia was to them. So it means a lot to me.
Sure.
And then also winning the Ansfield Wolf Book Award, to answer the other part of your question, because that award, it's the panelists, Henry Louis Gates, Rita Dove, my homegirl, my home sister, Simon Sharma, Joyce Carol Oates. So having these intellectual giants choose the book a lot. I got to share it that night with Edris Danicat, and it was in Cleveland, because it's the Cleveland Foundation. And so that I think the award, the actual ceremony, I think it was like on the 28th of September. My father was in the audience, my mom, my brothers, my nephew, and on October 22nd, less than about 4 weeks later, my father died. So it was like the last time, he got to, I saw him upright in a suit, sitting in the audience. I got to read poems and get this award. So it was a great night. It meant a lot.
Let me add another name that must have meant something to you. Carol Huck Smith.
Oh my God. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Carol
your
Hook Smith.
editor.
Yeah.
Talk about her.
Carol is just a beautiful spirit, man. I think Carol was either late 70s or 80 when I met her, and she was just going strong,
Yeah.
in the city. And so I met her at an AWP,
Hmm.
and Ellen Bryant Voigt had introduced me to her. And I was talking to Carol, she says a thing that the editors say,
Yeah.
"Oh, well, you should send me some of your work sometime." And I said, "Okay," thinking like there's no way she's gonna look at my work. And then Ellen put her hand on my shoulder. She says, "No, seriously, send her your work." And so I did.
Yeah.
And I've been sending Magnolia out for to different contests, different publishers, like in the open submission period, and I wasn't getting any bites. So I did the National Poetry Series. I sent out for that, and when the list came out, like all my friends were on the list, and I didn't get anything, right. So um, and so then I was teaching, and I was teaching a workshop, and I was like talking to this young lady in the workshop. And I was talking, saying the thing about, like, how you're reading a poem, and sometimes the ending of the poem is where the poem should begin, and you
Right.
know, and I said, I said that little parlor trick of like turning the poem upside down or whatever, and see what that does to it. And she had enough sense to ask me, well, why should I do that? And I thought about it. I said, oh yeah. And I said, well, you need to do that because, the poem moves toward transcendence if you change the order. And when I said that, it kind of clicked,
Mm,
for myself, that that's really what I needed to do with my collection, was reverse the order.
mm,
And so I reversed the order of it, and where I start on Magnolia's deathbed, and I move to the night before the spelling bee, and her moment of her greatest potential.
mhm,
And so I sent it back out, and within a week, I got two offers for the book, and one was Norton. And she just, Carol Hook Smith just called me up on the phone and said, "Oh, I read your book, and I'd like to publish it." I
mhm.
almost fell out my chair, you know.
I'm
And
gonna tell
so,
you. I'm gonna tell you a secret, man. I'm
yeah,
gonna tell you a secret. I talked to Carol Hook Smith on the phone. I said, I said, publish this book.
I'm
You
not
made
surprised.
that. So
It- you know,
I just want to let you know there. But because I met her sitting around a pool in Salt Lake City. But
oh, really, really.
yeah, many years ago. She
Brother,
was very sweet.
I always thank you, but I thank you even more now. So thank you for this. I was just talking to Peter J. Harris, who
Hmm.
tell you hello. And I was telling him, I said, man, Ethelbert, he's a mover and shaker, and he's always so organized. I said, we were talking, I said, man, I gotta go get ready. I gotta be ready up, so but I appreciate you. I
Right.
really
Well, let's go.
appreciate
Let's
that.
go. Let's go from Akron, Ohio, back to here to DC. 'Cause you mentioned Peter.
Yeah, yeah.
And your first
Let
book.
me say one more thing about Carol,
Sure.
though,
Hmm.
because I think she was really one of the, like, old school, like, New York editors.
Right.
And when I would come to New York, you know, always had to have lunch with her. She demanded it, but always introduced me to everyone at Norton. So when I would meet her in New York, I go there on Fifth Avenue, go in. She introduced me to everyone, from the person, like people in the mailroom,
Right.
literally all the way up to the president of Norton.
Hmm.
And we would go to Algonquin Hotel and have, lunch and tea, whatever, but just really old school, and just like just a beautiful human being. And she read everything,
But
every
when you say that, that's exactly when I first met her. She said she was old school because we're sitting around this pool in Salt Lake City, right? And she's editing manuscripts. And me and Jason Schindler, who's no longer living, but
line.
Jason Schindler and we're telling old jokes and stuff like that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
We're on vacation. We're supposed to be teaching
Yeah,
workshop.
yeah, yeah.
But Carol was in there like the old school line by line and
Line
reading.
by line, man. Yeah,
Right,
yeah,
Well,
yeah.
let's go back to Rise. We were talking about this is your first book, and
Yes,
you have two. I want you to read two jazz poems because one is linked to WPFW,
yeah.
but you also the one I really like is St. John Coltrane African Orthodox Church. So Read that, and then also public radio plays Eddie Harris.
Okay. So this is St. John Coltrane African Orthodox Church. Maybe it was the practice of practice, he and Alice in the grocery store, and him fingering keys up and down the aisles. The magic of capturing spirit in a whole note, in a mouthpiece, in Alabama, like light bent through a prism into color. Maybe they figured out his distant relationship to Lazarus in 56, pushing the stone from in front of his open bell, bouncing sound off the east to the west. It was intangible the way he raised a soul to intaglio, like a gospel hymn raises tongues to tones understood only by the secret society of the saxophone. Alice knew the secrets of the stars and the notes in between, the power of laying hands on scales, and the baptism into the void between chords and back to bring forth what had not been before trained. It's no surprise to see the church with his face stained in the glass. No questions surround the choir of saxophones, the congregation's many shades of sound. Not the skin, but the sound, not the verse, but the riff, not the jazz, but the spirit. How is this any different from heroin churning a man's soul? If Jesus can turn water into wine, then a junkie can resurrect as a saint. Maybe you have not come to the altar with sucker bites from Satan up and down your arms, taking the fellowship wherever you could find it, blown blood through a horn, shot up with the devil, and felt him ejaculate in your veins. When man is at his weakest, faith has a perfect pitch.
A. Van Jordan reading his poem, um, St. John Coltrane African Orthodox Church, from his book Rise. And you
Okay.
had the public radio plays Eddie Harris.
Yes, yes. This is a true story. Public radio plays Eddie Harris. Clouds stand in protest of morning. I wonder, should I cross the picket line sky and go to work? The 70 bus stood me up for our 8:32 a.m. date. Headlines say I voted for a man who cheated on his wife. By 2 p.m., my body's at war with a virus. I am now blue fire. My throat is lined with cactus. There was no mention of this in the morning paper. I crawl back home to my room. My bed sheets are cold. At 10 p.m., a call of bad news from my family, something about a car and my brother. Doctors say he may never dance again. This chord of bad news accompanies today's riff. Folks have gone on strike in heaven. Sweat pours off the shoulders of the night. No need for liquids and drugs. I'm already dead. If WPFW FM can't resurrect me, Lazarus was a liar. Thank God they're playing Eddie Harris. I have friends who are atheists. I have ammunition for our next argument. They play 4 Eddie Harris tunes in a row. Faith healers are tuning in. I'm all but cured when they make the announcement. Eddie Harris died today. Thoughts tornado over my bed. It pirouettes over the city with hips like my mama's. Eddie always said there's no such thing as a wrong note, only bad connections to the next. I put the alarm clock under the sheets. In the morning, it will sound like music.
Thank you, A. Van Jordan. Van, what makes a good jazz poem? You know, I'm listening to you. It's not necessarily the like the content, but you also sometimes have the rhythms. You know, sometimes a jazz poem people think it's because you make a reference to Miles Davis, so it's a jazz poem.
Yeah, right. Yeah. I mean, I think it's a lot like, I mean, I think it is kind of the tradition of the ekphrastic poem. Like, you're sort of describing another art form inside of the poem. And, I always tell people that it can't just be like you can't be liner notes. Like you can't just describe it or sort of talk about it. You have to bring something to it that that adds to the experience of the music. And so for me, I feel like it has to be personalized in some way.
Mhm.
So there's something very specific about the experience of listening to it that you're trying to capture. Something very specific about what it does to you internally, and you're trying to express that because I can tell someone, oh man, you should listen to Coltrane, he's great, or I can say, Eddie Harris is like beautiful improviser or whatever, but it doesn't really it doesn't mean anything unless I can talk about what it does to me.
Mhm. Well, let's look at your latest book, When I Wake, I Cry to Dream Again. Um, when I picked up this book, I found myself going back to your notes in the back. I started doing that first, right?
I've heard that a lot.
When are notes necessary in a poetry book?
Yeah. Well, this book, the concept of it was something that so speaking of editors, I'll tell you, so like when I was writing this book, I was working on it and I just felt like I didn't know how to present it to folks. And then my editor, Jill Belowski, now she, now that Carol has passed on, um, Jill Belowski had, she just called and said, "What are you working on?" I told her about this book, and she said, "I want to see some of it." But it's so hard to explain to people because it's looking at specifically at various Shakespearean characters and the experience of like what it's like to be a Black character on the Renaissance stage. Folks, you come out on stage, um, and when that character appears, they're already seen. There's the audience already has made up their mind about who this person is.
Mhm.
And the thing that Shakespeare would do is that he would have other characters talk about characters before they appeared, and sometimes it would be to ennoble them. So, like the first time you hear Hamlet's name, it's Valiant Hamlet. So by the time Hamlet shows up, there he is, valiant, um, and Iago, he's besmirching the character of Othello before he appears, and we hear Prospero doing the same thing with Caliban, and so um, in my mind, it was very similar to the ways in which police, they hear something about, oh, this is a Black man who's done something, and they show up on the scene already made with their mind
Mhm.
made up that
Okay,
this person.
I'm gonna get into that because that gets into your book. But I want to stay on this point about the notes,
Mm,
um, because you explained that were here and dealing with the Cave Quantum group.
yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
so I'm looking at what happens sometime in a class where poetry is being discussed. The question comes back: how much should a poet explain to the reader, and when should a poet make a reader sweat?
Well, I think the poet should always make a reader sweat. I mean, like I
Sound like
think,
that. You sound you talking about James Brown
yeah,
now.
exactly right. Man, I think that it's important for the reader to come to poetry for something they can't get anywhere else. And I believe that poetry is the highest form of language, so it has to be the highest form of experience in the written arts. So you want to bring something that they can't get anywhere else from it. So, um, and the other thing is that I feel like in most of our days, like you go through your day, um, we're taking in information, and there's a lot of chatter, news and other things, and now with social media, but there's not a lot of time to kind of sit with something and let it
Mhm.
just a light on a moment of thought, like on a topic or anything. So we don't get enough time. I don't think we have the luxury of time to kind of meditate on
Mhm.
things before we make judgment on them.
Mhm.
And I think poems, they call for that. They call for you to sort of slow down for a moment and just think about this and take it seriously. Um, yeah, and I'm sorry. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, well then, as we have this slowing down, I want to link something back to what you were talking about when you were talking about Magnolia, because I saw that as your transitional book coming after Rise,
Yeah, yeah,
which actually won the Penn Oakland Josephine Miles Award. But in Magnolia, we see you using what I call the definition as a poetic form. And I wonder about, is that your creation? Or was this
yeah,
also an outgrowth of the fact that you're dealing with Magnolia, which is dealing with spelling, and
yeah.
the form begins with Magnolia also?
Both. Yeah. So I hadn't seen it anywhere before, and I actually searched out to try to see, and there are some things that Gertrude Stein had done, similarly, but y- you know, um, inscrutably, you know what I mean? But but in terms of like thinking about the definition, the dictionary definition as a form for the poem, yeah. So I invented that, but I did it for specifically to serve that book,
Mhm.
and it's become handy in
Well, let's
other.
talk about something here because a few weeks ago I interviewed Edward Hirsch, and he has this glossary, and we were talking about definitions, and I made reference to how African Americans were creating forms.
Yeah,
The bop, skimmy, shimmy, all those things. And here you are, here also in terms of creating forms. And I was wondering
I'm
whether
African
that's
American too.
hmm?
So I'm African American too.
Right. Yeah. Oh, I didn't know. That's why I'm glad we're doing it. We have a Zoom link.
Yeah, yes.
Radio can fool anybody.
I want to get in on that.
But what I was looking at was the fact that, and it's interesting that you had Copy Kana, because one of the things that I always looked at when it got into like African Americans doing stuff, um, the craft element was always put aside. Like, we just mix it up like it was magic, and we did it.
Yeah, yeah.
Or we're just a born athlete, we don't have to really do anything with craft. And I was wondering in terms of, getting recognition for this,
Mm.
where you are, I'm making you sound like, you're Karanga, you're coming up with Kwanzaa.
Right. No, man, it's like, I appreciate that. I appreciate that. I feel like I've seen so many poets come up behind me who've used the form and have imitated the form, and there have been like dictionary poem, poetry contests, and things like that happen at different universities and things that I've been invited to. So I see the form. It has developed. I've seen people do interesting things with it and kind of variations of that form.
Should should
So
it
I'm,
should
I'm
this should
really
it should this
happy.
definition be seen as a prose poem?
I think so. So the thing about it, the thing I like about the form is that it's flexible enough to kind of be a mix of the kind of lyrical and the narrative at once. And and it also it just sort of pushes the writer to think about something with a little more rigor, because now you have this one restriction that you put on it. It has to like follow these definitions
Right.
and variations of the word. And so now
But
that
then I
you're,
also see you with, even though when you have this formal definition, we see this sort of like how like a black person gonna put a little slant on their hat. That you
yeah,
have there's
yeah,
a
yeah,
definition, but there's also like the black definition.
yeah, 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 yeah. So yeah, you want to
That's like
put
putting a little pork in the pot, right?
yeah, you want to put your own style on it, right? So and that's the thing about it, like, it's not Merriam-Webster. It
Right.
has to
No,
be
not
your
at
voice.
all.
It has to be your voice. And so you have to hear something that you wouldn't, like, just like what you're saying about jazz, something that you wouldn't hear if you went into a dictionary. So you have this definition, but it's like as if this definition was written specifically for you.
Well,
So
how do you decide? Okay, you're writing you have your collection of poems. You're writing these poems
yeah.
out, whether it's Magnolia or whether it's this new book that you're dealing with. How do you decide that this is the word that I want to use as a definition that I want to define in the manuscript?
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you. Oh,
Don't
I
worry
have no.
about that. It's okay. It's
Okay.
radio. We can't see
Yeah. Yeah.
that.
Okay. All right. So, the thing is, with the Magnolia, I was trying to look at the spelling bee words
Mm.
and trying to like come up with a definition for those, and it just wasn't worth it. It just wasn't good. So I was trying and trying, and I thought, oh man, this seems like it's not it's I just it was a bad idea. It wasn't, using these like spelling bee words
Mhm.
in these poems. And as I was looking them up, I was running across the definitions of prepositions.
Mhm.
And as you're a poet, you're thinking about verbs and nouns because those are the words that really carry the imagery in the poem. But then prepositions become words that are kind of like the link, to the connective tissue between those images, right?
Mhm.
And so I thought, what happens if I privilege these? And I would see that the definition of these prepositions were so like long in the Oxford English Dictionary. And I thought, wait, man, do I know the definition of from or to? You know what I mean? Like,
Right, right.
and so, and as I would read them, I could see a narrative kind of developing. So I was trying to do that. And when I waked, the idea was to take words that had become just vernacular or parlance of,
Hmm.
of kind of everyday speech that we may not realize came out of like racist intent, like
Right.
words like fair or grandfather clause
Or juvenile.
or juvenile,
Right,
like that kind of, things that, we find out, oh, this word's being used against me
right,
some way
right.
and trying
Well,
to take it
right.
back.
Well, I want to ask you one question before we take the break, so that the second half of our show will be you talking about and reading from When I Wake, I Cry to Dream Again. Um, when I look at your work, Van, it seems like conceptual art. It seems like it's a sculpture or an installation. And so I was looking at how you have these four sections of your books, and I was wondering how they intersect and interact. And
Mm,
because I felt after reading the book, if I was teaching this book, I
mm.
would begin with the title poem, okay, because that introduces Dr. Melba Higginbotham, and that
Yeah.
seems to be the key. Talk about Dr. Melba Higginbotham and how you introduce that character into the book in that section, and then we'll pick it up after the break. So this will be.
Okay. So Melba Higginbotham, she's like kind of a composite of different um, Black women scholars. I have to say, the person I had in mind this is not someone I know, but when I've seen her at conferences and the work I've read was Hortense Spillers.
Mhm.
Someone who had that kind of gravitas and just intellect. But and so in writing about her, I wanted someone who could carry, the keeper of the record, who could hold all that intellectual knowledge and sort of pass it down. And so the idea of that, we can call it a poem, we can call it prose or whatever we want to, however you want to approach it.
But
But
this is what I would say when I saw this, and that maybe because my friend Miho's influence on me. I saw this as a Japanese form where you have like haiku, like a haiku, where you have the
yeah, yeah,
poetry would be haiku, and then a prose.
prose, yeah,
That's how
yeah,
I was looking at
yeah.
it in terms of the structure.
Yeah. Thanks. So that was kind of the idea. I mean, it was like, just kind of movement. There's so many. I was thinking about different hybrid books. Um, uh, Dante's Vita Nuova, Jean Toomer's Cane,
Hmm.
books that kind of move between verse and prose.
Hmm.
That I wanted it to sort of hold everything in it, you
Okay, now
know.
focus in terms of Dr. Melba Higginbotham. She's a Shakespearean scholar, okay,
Yeah.
and this has
So
a lot to do with the Tempest and the whole structure. That's why I
yeah,
said
yeah,
we begin with this section, which is the
yeah,
title
yeah.
of the book, and then we
Right.
fit in the rest.
Yeah. So Higginbotham, like she's a Shakespearean scholar, so she can explain the importance of looking at Shakespeare and then why it's important for us to think about it in terms of race today and the complexity of Shakespeare's thinking and how subversive in many ways he was. Because I think sometimes people are very quick to say, oh, Shakespeare was kind of racist. He did, this Othello, this characters, Caliban. But then when you think about what was happening at the time he was writing each of those characters, you find out, oh, there was, the Queen Elizabeth was like trying to kick out the blackamoors, not just Moors,
Hmm.
but because some people say, well, it's the Spanish Moor. No, she specifically said the black Moors.
Hmm.
So if you were Moor and you were from Spain and you were white, you could stay.
Right.
But she was trying to get rid of that to for the sounds like uh you know the orange one talking about
Right.
make America great.
Getting rid of the stain.
The stain, yeah, and so yeah, so this was the whole thing that I think Higginbotham could embody. Like she could talk about this and explain, and she basically tells us, this is why we're looking at this. You know,
But
why it's
you're
important.
talking about
Yeah,
here about, but this is actually you, A. Van Jordan, who created this
yeah,
character, and this
yeah,
is how
yeah,
you're putting
yeah,
together this book. Okay, we're gonna
exactly.
take a break. My guest today is A. Van Jordan. We're talking about his book, When I Wake, I Cry to Dream Again. The show's On the Margin. My name's Ethelbert Miller. The station's WPFW 89.3 FM.
Very often, Juneteenth is presented as a story of news of the Emancipation Proclamation traveling slowly to the Deep South in Texas. But it was really a story of power traveling slowly and of freedom being seized. On Wednesday, June 19th, WPFW presents Emancipated Spirits, Slavery, Freedom, and Resistance from 5 a.m. until midnight. Through discussions, music, and spoken word, we will interrogate the history of that day, the true meaning of freedom, and the role resistance continues to play in securing liberation. That's Emancipated Spirits, Slavery, Freedom, and Resistance, Wednesday, June 19th, 5 a.m. until midnight on WPFW, Building a Better World, one broadcast at a time.
Okay, we're back on the margin with my guest, A. Van Jordan. A. Van, I wanted you to talk, well, actually read from this book. I wanted you to read the Tamir Rice poems, which I found interesting because, we were talking about Shakespeare, but you have the Tamir Rice poems here, and it seems that I like how they connect to the poems of the young people photographed in Mali by the
Oh yeah.
photographer Malik Sadabi. So talk about that, but first read these sections, along with the note that's at the back, so people get a sense of how you created this character in this poem.
Okay, so I'm sorry. You want me to read the note
No,
about?
I want you to read first the poem and then the note.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, so people hear the poems.
Is there a specific poem you want me to do?
Well, I wanted you to read the ones that begins with the Tamir Wright's cave. You could read that, and then it's Earsoft and
Okay,
fragments of Tamir's body,
okay,
and then the notes that's at the back.
okay. Um, so the Tamir Rice case. I'll read that part
Yeah.
first. On November 22nd, 2014, when officers Timothy Lohman and Frank Garmbach arrived at the Cuddle Recreation Center's gazebo, this is in Cleveland, driving their squad car on the grass directly in front of the picnic table at which Tamir Rice sat. Tamir got up, seeing a police car coming in hot at high speed, driving on grass in the middle of the park, and barely coming to a stop in front of you. Who wouldn't get up from their seat? Initially, the report said that the officer shot within 2 seconds of seeing Tamir. But if you watch the video, as I have many times now, you'll see that the car hasn't settled to a stop before Tamir is shot. Later, it's revealed that they shot him less than 2 seconds after pulling up. The timing of the killing is important. An argument made about the shooting, an argument that allowed the officers to justify their shooting, is that the airsoft pellet gun Tamir was carrying looked a good deal like a real Colt M1911 semi-automatic pistol. But this would only be important if Tamir had a chance to pull out the toy and if the officers had time to see it and to assess whether it looked lethal. If you shoot someone before they have a chance to resist or to pull a weapon or to issue a threat, are you really killing them because you feel threatened? What then could you be threatened by seeing a 12-year-old boy, black boy, standing in front of you? Um, and so here's a poem, Airsoft. Like a whisper from a friend telling a secret, the gun reveals itself only to invite, not start any trouble, mind you, just to invite the boy who listens to come out to play. And the boy knows not so much what the gun's pellet says as he understands what the pellet will mean to say, whistling through a windy afternoon past onlookers who neither hear nor see the streak of inhuman intent searing through the ether. So he takes his airsoft pellet gun in hand, as he might take his laces in hand to tighten them more securely around his juvenile ankles. That's to say, without much care, but just out of habit before taking off to run. Everyone runs faster with tight laces. This makes sense, of course, and the hope to run can excite as much as hitting full stride with wind washing over a boy's face. And toy guns masquerade as lethal guns in a boy's dreamland where no one dies, where they simply lie down and play dead, but they live to play on. as mysterious as a cat in a box, a toy gun in a black boy's pocket, the gun neither dead nor alive unless offered a chance to empty his pockets to solve the paradox of what a day might hold.
A. Van Jordan reading from his book, When I Walked, I Cried to Dream Again. So why don't you also read fragments of Tamir's body?
Okay. This is Fragments of Timir's Body. It has an epigraph from Hamlet. I am dead, thou who livest, report me and my cause, all right, to the unsatisfied. Fragments of Timir's Body. The body's shadow had much to say, but no one in earshot understood its language. The clouds stood heavy, and when the cops confronted the body, the boy showed his prowess to indulge in play, just one of his many gifts which scared onlookers. No black man appeared in the park, just a child, just people judging him. As he approached, she wondered how she explained him to her father. The opportunities for joy presented themselves in more colors than the boy could name, so he chose black, enjoying them all. Passers-by who laughed at him showed their gratitude by memorizing his face, then by wielding his visage whenever they found themselves in a jam. Was his laughter a declaration of his joy or a sacred prayer offered over poor souls resigned to their fate? Corn chips, black licorice, marbles, plastic pellets, toy gun, jawbreakers, bubblegum, crushed apogee of memory. When he imagines knowing then what he now knows, he imagines dying before his time. A jar of preserved pears, canned by his grandmother, occupies his mind. When he gets home, a man beats a drum in courtship to his beloved. Nah, a boy dribbles a basketball, boasting of his youth. A saga took place in the mind of the police as they glimpsed the black child who was caught smiling as he walked toward them. His sister's scream, pulled from a well too black to ring shallow echoes whenever his name.
A. Van Jordan. A. I want you now to read the notes because if I was a reader, I read these poems and now I go to the back of the book and I'm looking on page 113, I'm looking at your notes and you have the Tempest and the Tamir Rice case sequence.
Yes, yes. Okay, so should I read the whole
Yeah,
thing?
yeah, read the whole thing because I think that it'll explain to our listeners exactly how you go from the poem and why the notes add something to the poems.
Oh, uh, uh, okay, so one of the biggest surprises I've experienced in middle age is my involuntary desire to protect young people. I've read that the brain's chemistry shifts in your 40s and empathy gets an upgrade. There's other research to the contrary, though, that uh, shows that many people harden in their tendency to believe in stereotypes, which amplifies their impulse for othering. For myself, at least, I know here in my 50s, I'm surprised at what brings tears to my eyes for others, whether witnessing their joy or their pain. So when I hear reports of adults in uniform justifying why they felt the need to shoot a child on sight in less than 2 seconds, I'm clear that this person is not psychologically equipped to carry a weapon. From where does an idea like a black body presents a threat emerge? When did the Western world begin thinking of the black body both as undesirable and as a hypersexualized object, as both necessary for slave labor and yet lazy, or as a threat and all at once as a joke? Wondering about these origins has not risen to the nomenclature of cliche. No, sadly, we don't ask these questions enough. I've been thinking about this topic since I was a child standing with a white adult pointing a gun in my face, and the many cliche encounters that followed throughout my life. We, Black people, are taught that the best strategy to survive these stinging moments of life threatening racism is to stay calm. But I want to know, what was the Philip that lit this insidious flame? I'm not alone in my inquiry. Early modernist scholars, particularly African American Shakespearean scholars, have been going in on this topic for a minute now. In the Cambridge Companion to Shakespeare and Race, Patricia Akimi locates the seriousness in racist humor in the early modern period in her chapter, Racist Humor and Shakespearean Comedy. One moment stands out in bold relief to me when she points out that Shakespearean racist humor reveals the production of maintenance of groups, processes of inclusion and exclusion, and of hierarchization. These are the building blocks of racism. And building on this point, she goes on in A Whole Theater of Others, an episode of the Folger Shakespeare Library Shakespeare Unlimited podcast, to say, how are stereotypes created and how are they maintained? One of the ways is through communal laughter, which is to say, those in on the joke laugh at those who are othered. Over time, something as seemingly simple as ridicule devolves into justifying violence against the ridiculed.
Thank you, A. Van Jordan. A. Van Jordan, I want to go back to the airsoft poem that you read,
Mhm.
because when I read it, I circled one, two, three, four. It's in the one, two, three, four, five. In the sixth stanza, the word juvenile, because that will
Mhm.
be a term that you'll use the poetic definition,
Yeah.
in the book, and that also leads us into the photographs and this project that you worked on in terms of with the Mali photographer on Sadabe. So talk about how this flows together.
So part of it was thinking about the ways in which um, Black joy can be snuffed out, in the which kind of goes back to Magnolia as well. The idea that this is a very fragile time. It's an important time because any significant experience you have as a tween or a teen can be indelible. As my mom would say, this had this old saying, as a twig is bent, so grows the tree. And so you have these moments when you would think, this is so important. But then when I would see a story like Tamir Rice or Trayvon Martin or Michael Brown, any of these like young men, um, I think how their lives were snuffed out before they even had a chance, to develop. And so and thinking about being a juvenile, so you can see it on one hand. Sometimes the word is used pejoratively, and sometimes it's just a way of describing an age group.
Mhm.
Um,
Well,
but
bring that into this age group, because if I pick up this book, if I'm in a bookstore and I pick up your book, there's photographs in it, and these are
right.
photographs of juveniles in Mali.
Yeah. So Malik Sidibe, the Malian photographer, what he was doing at the time was, as Mali was going through its um, liberation, the idea was that the elders, their one generation was saying, look, we're gonna get back to our roots. We're gonna stick with our culture, the religion, the language, the garb that we're wearing, everything, is going to be Malian. And then the young people were like, wait a minute, you know, uh, this Motown happening, James Brown is doing his thing, the civil rights movement is happening, Black arts movement, all this stuff is happening. And so they were reading Ebony magazine, they were seeing what was going on, listening to the music,
They have afros.
afros, you know what I mean? So they were out, they would go out in their traditional garb, but underneath it, they would have on these little suits, mini dresses like the Supremes,
Mhm.
all of that stuff. And they would go out to these undisclosed locations that are just like word of mouth. And they show up and they take the African garb off and they would, dance and take photographs, and Sidibe was there taking their photographs and kind of chronicling this moment. Um, and so it was just to see the contrast of young people expressing their joy together on their own terms. and just sort of seeing that in contrast to these lives that were being um, extinguished when they were just getting started.
Yeah, this is why, Evangeline, I like your work because it lends itself to a lot of discussion. It's not a quick read. It's not necessarily easy read. I want to mention four writers that if I was teaching, I would put you right next to. I say, okay, we're going to read so and so, so and so, and then Evan Jordan, and I want to know whether these writers in any way have any sort of influence on you, sort of like a downbeat test or something like
Okay, okay.
that.
I'll just listen. I'll just put the
Right,
headphone and
right.
listen.
There's four names. Okay, one is Derek Walcott. The
Okay.
second is Jay Wright. The third is
Oh,
Nathaniel Mackey, and the fourth is Bob Kaufman.
oh, wow, wow. I mean, um, I can't imagine doing what I do without having read um, any one of those
Well, so
writers.
we let's go through them. Let's go through Derek Walcott because I was thinking of this very ambitious, Searles.
Yeah.
I was just thinking it's great work.
Yeah, yeah. Listen, you read someone like Walcott, and often tell my students like the first day of class that the most underrated form of genius is discipline. You know, and you look at someone like Walcott and his attention not just to um, syntax, but to accentual syllabic verse and the way he's, even when he's writing what is seemingly free verse, there's so much rigor on the line. You can't escape it. And someone who doesn't know poetry, you might hear it and you just hear the music of it. But if you know how this thing is made, I mean, everything's a masterpiece. So yeah, yeah.
I heard Derek Walcott read one time. I think it was at George Mason University, and
Wow.
his voice was it has been in my ear since then. And what I also liked that he read his poem, and he was like a little Miles Davis. He wasn't even looking at the audience. He
Right.
was he was like he was looking at one of these Caribbean waves coming in. He's
Right. Right.
sitting at the beach.
Yeah.
And you guys can be there. What about Jay Wright? Because Covey Con just was honoring Jay Wright. Jay Wright is one person that I continue to correspond, and I have a
Mhm.
number of unpublished manuscripts in my archives from Jay Wright. So I keep
Wow.
saving
Wow.
everything that he sent me. But what about him? Because it seems as if he was just discovered by Copy Econom recently.
Yeah. I mean, I think Jay Wright's one of these poets who um, everyone who's a poet respects him and understands that he's a great intellect. Um, but he's not a name that if you're not a poet, you would
Right.
never necessarily know. Um, and I think one of the things that I like about Jay Wright is his sense of how to use symbols, language, and themes of a culture, iconography inside of his poetry. And same like Walcott, he's applying a great deal of um, craft to that. So it's not just I'm just you know sitting somewhere thinking about the Southwest
Right.
and the Black connection to you know this land and this Aztec culture and things like that. He's thinking about
Mm-hmm.
how do I represent this
Right.
in the language and the
Mm-hmm.
complexity of it in the language.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
he also like the thing about all these poets that you've mentioned is that um, I think if they're sort of both lyrical and then some are probably would say a little more experimental in ways, but they're all distinctly they have very distinct voices.
But your voice has become very distinct and has a lot to do with you creating these forms also. But what I looked at, and I looked at Nathaniel Mackey,
Mhm,
what happens if I don't know certain things, I can't have
mhm.
an appreciation. I got
Yeah.
to get into the Dogon culture and stuff like that. I also saw something which I'm glad I was witness to. I remember Nathaniel Mackey was here many years ago. He was a writer in residence for the WPA, Watch Project for the Arts. And I brought him up to Howard University. I
Mhm.
said, you got to see something here. And it was a show by the sculptor Ed Love. And what happened, I still remember Nathaniel Mackey in the doorway of the gallery up at Howard saying, like, man, like this is what I've been writing about, right?
Oh,
And
wow.
on the next cover of Hambone magazine that he was putting out was Ed Love sculpture on the cover. But what I say that goes back to what I was describing you about you creating sculpture and installation. That I see your work having that same type of level as
Oh,
Nathaniel Mackey. That
wow.
that you have to prepare yourself, like for example, I've got to know something about the Tempest. I've got to know about Shakespeare. I've got to know about Ira Aldridge. I've got to know about all those things. I guess you can't be a Howard student going into the theater. I've got to know
Yeah,
who Ira Aldridge is.
yeah. That's the first time I heard his name,
Oh, Howard.
Howard. I
Yeah.
said, "Who's Ira Aldridge?"
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
because of your book, I realized this guy is buried in Poland. So thank
Oh,
you, Van
man,
Jordan.
that's so funny. Yeah.
Yeah. But I want to before we come to the end of the show, I want to raise something which is very important to you. And we mentioned a number of books, but we didn't mention Keeper. You have a strong interest in film. And even in this book, When I Wake, I Cry to Dream Again, there is a reference to Charles Burnett 1978 film Killer of Sheep. Talk about
Mm.
that film and your interest in film as we move towards the end of our show. And you have a collection that you really highlight film.
Yeah. Well, Killer Sheep, and Barnett, it's just like the thing about Charles Burnett is that, when you look at this guy, neo-realism, the
Mhm.
idea of just kind of capturing everyday life. And in that film, he captures both um, the kind of joy of being young, and also in Killer Sheep, I'm talking about the
Mhm.
joy of being young, and also the struggles that are all around that while you're trying to like hold on to your joy, hold on to your youth. There are all these moments that kind of like grow you up fast,
Right.
and you have to kind of deal that with that and sort of witness that. Because you're just trying to be a kid, but then your
Mhm.
parents are struggling to try to
Mhm.
like allow um, allow you to have a place to live and lay your head and some food to eat, while you're going out to play. Um, and so just the ability that he was able to capture of like just putting the camera there and knowing exactly where the camera should be to capture those moments is something that's priceless. I mean, I look, it's almost like seeing the animated version of like a Gordon Parks photograph. It's like when
Mm.
I'm looking at
Well, the film
Burnett.
gave me an idea. I don't know if you're coming to the next Furious Flower conference that's taking place in September, but I thought that you and I, Avery and Ethelbert, we would show up with our dog mask. Like the
Yeah.
killer. We would
Let's
show
do
up.
it. Let's do it.
We would do two little hounds.
Right,
and,
right, right.
and we'll do a little Barack and say, "You want to imitate my puppy? Bow wow."
Exactly.
But look, I would have so much fun in terms of that. But you know, what are the things that you see um Kabe Khan especially because you're there? What do you think we need to teach the next generation of African American poets?
I mean, I feel like I think the most important thing it's certainly important to write about the your personal experience and all that stuff, but I mean, I feel like the first order of business for the poet is to chronicle the history and culture of your people, you know, and for them to know it and for them to write about it and to carry it on, because the preservation of culture is what this is really all about, and we come from a people whose culture has been it's been the job of other people to try to extinguish it, but we keep coming back, we keep showing up and we keep creating the culture and evolving the culture. And so we have to write about that. We have to capture that.
Hmm. Well, when you say that, I think of one writer who captures that, but then doesn't stop there because I think of where because of his faith and things that lead him. But I look at how Robert Hayden will give us these fantastic poems about race, but then he's also in American Journal. He will talk about extraterrestrials coming, and he's a Baha'i. His work is moving
Yeah,
beyond race, and so I
yeah,
see him as a definite individual who should be highlighted to the next generation of African American poets because he shows up a certain path of how you can be rooted in your culture but then
Yeah.
also in terms of how you can also transcend your culture without that being negative.
Yeah. I Hayden's my North Star, man. Like
Mhm.
he's the poet that if I think about a poet um who I who I'm thinking I'm conscious of, like consciously thinking of when I'm writing, he's he's the North Star,
See,
you
so
know.
because you say that, see, now this because you said that, it's at the end of our show. You mentioned about how he's the North Star. So now there's an indication you do not want to wear your dog mask because the hounds will be chasing you and you'll never get. See, so you either have to be a
Mm.
hound or you have to decide that your eye's going to be on the North Star.
I don't know North Star. I know.
So you get the North Star. I'm gonna just say bow wow and goodbye.
Okay, okay.
Okay, man. I want to say I always enjoyed talking to you, and you're a person I admire, and I'm happy that you're passing
Oh,
on, your not just your work, but your personality and who you are to another generation of African American poets. Okay. My
thank you.
guest
Thank you.
today has been A. Van Jordan. He's a professor of creative writing at Stanford University. And we've been talking about his new book, When I Wake, I Cry to Dream Again, which is a new book published by W. W. Norton and Company. My name's Ethelbert Miller. The show's On the Margins. The station's WPFW 89.3 FM.
Hi, this is Tom Cole, host of G Strings here on W.